My name is Evelyn Mae Johnson, and I am 72 years old. 72 years of long nights, early mornings, sacrifices big and small, and the kind of lessons you can only learn by stumbling your way through life and somehow still standing tall. I always say life didn't hand me much sugar, but I learned to stir the bitter with a steady spoon. I was born in Macon, Georgia, back in 1953. I was the third of 6 children, and Lord, we were poor. My daddy used to say we weren't poor, we just didn't have much money. But let me tell you, when you've got holes in your shoes and you're patching dresses with scraps from flour sacks, poor is what you are. Mama worked her fingers raw scrubbing white folks' laundry, and Daddy, well, he had good intentions but more bottles than jobs. From them I learned 2 things: to work hard and to never depend on anyone who wasn't dependable. That lesson carried me through when I had my boy, Marcus. His daddy, my husband Charles, was taken from us too soon. A heart attack at just 36 years old left me with a 10-year-old boy staring up at me like I held the whole world in my hands. And in a way, I did. Everything I did from that day forward was for Marcus, my only child, my heartbeat walking outside my body. I worked double shifts as a nurse, patched up my own blisters when I couldn't afford new shoes, and prayed over that boy every single night. He was going to have more, do more, and be more than I ever could. Now, before I dive deeper into my story, let me pause right here and say something to you. If what you've heard so far touches your heart, or if it reminds you of your own story, whether you're a mama, a daddy, or someone who's ever sacrificed for family, then do me a little favor. Go ahead and like this video, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you won't miss when I share the rest. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I love knowing where my story is reaching people. Alright, now let's get back to it. Marcus grew up to be the kind of man who made me proud. Smart, polite, handsome in a way that turned heads, but humble enough not to care. He had a soft spot for music, played the trumpet in school, even won a couple awards. I used to sit in those folding chairs during band concerts, clapping till my hands stung, thinking, that's my boy. When he graduated high school, I cried so hard they had to hand me tissues. He was the first in our family to go to college, and when he walked across that stage, it felt like I was walking too. But life has a way of turning corners you don't see coming. Marcus met Rachel during his last year in college. She was a pretty girl, I'll give her that, light-skinned, with long straight hair always swinging like she knew it was her crown. She spoke with a sharpness that could slice bread, and though she smiled plenty, I could never shake the feeling that it didn't quite reach her eyes. You know how some people laugh, but there's no warmth behind it? That was Rachel. At first, I held my tongue. I wanted to give her a chance because my son seemed to love her, and what mama wants to be the one to rain on her child's parade. Still, something in my spirit warned me. This girl was trouble. She carried herself like the world owed her something, and I'd lived long enough to know those kinds of people never stop taking. Time went on, and Marcus grew more serious about her. He brought her home for Thanksgiving once, and I noticed how she barely touched the food, how she looked at my sweet potato pie like it was beneath her. Later, when I offered her a slice to take home, she wrinkled her nose and said, "Oh, I don't really eat heavy desserts." I smiled, but inside I thought, baby, it's not heavy. It's love baked with sugar and cinnamon. That's the difference between us. Now, I don't want to sound bitter. I tried, Lord knows I tried, to welcome Rachel into my heart. But she made it hard. She didn't talk much to me, except to ask questions about Marcus's job, his income, his plans. She acted like I was a piece of furniture, useful, but not worth noticing. And yet, I stayed quiet, because I wanted my son to be happy. That brings me to the day everything shifted. It was a bright Saturday afternoon. I had just come back from the grocery store, carrying bags heavier than my bones really wanted to handle, but I was stubborn. I made myself some tea, sat at the kitchen table, and decided to call Rachel. Not Marcus, Rachel. I thought it was time I tried again, tried to bridge whatever gap she'd built between us. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice high and sweet, like she was pretending to be polite. "Hello." "Hi, Rachel, it's Evelyn," I said, trying to keep my tone warm. "I was just wondering if y'all set a date for the wedding yet." I'd like to mark it on my calendar. Make sure I'm ready." There was a pause, and then she laughed, a short, clipped laugh that made my stomach sink. "Oh, Miss Evelyn," she said, and her voice dripped with something I couldn't quite name. "We got married last week." I nearly dropped my teacup. "Excuse me?" "Yes, last week," she said, matter of fact, like she was telling me the weather. "We wanted to keep it small, just for special people." For special people. The words rang in my ears like church bells on Sunday morning, only they weren't calling me to worship. They were calling me to heartache. I sat there frozen, the room spinning around me. My only son, the child I had poured my soul into, had gotten married without me. And his wife was standing there on the phone, telling me I wasn't special enough to be included. I tried to speak, but my throat felt like it was closing. Finally, I managed to whisper, "I see." "Well, congratulations then." My voice cracked on the last word, but I forced it out. Rachel just said, "Thank you." And then, as if she hadn't just cut me to pieces, she added, "We'll send you some pictures." Pictures. Like I was some distant cousin, not the woman who brought Marcus into this world. When I hung up the phone, I sat there in silence. My tea had gone cold, my hands trembled, and tears welled up in my eyes. But I didn't cry, not yet. I just stared out the window at the magnolia tree in my yard, its branches swaying in the breeze, and wondered how life could be so cruel. I had given everything to my son. Everything. And now, on the most important day of his life, I was cast aside like an afterthought. And for the first time in 72 years, I felt truly invisible. My house was too quiet that evening, and the quiet pressed down on me like a heavy quilt I didn't ask for. I tried to busy myself, washing the dishes, folding laundry, even dusting the top shelf of the bookcase I hadn't touched in months. But no matter how much I moved, I couldn't shake Rachel's words from my head. "We got married last week. Just for special people." They echoed in the corners of the room, in the spaces between my breaths, until I felt like I couldn't hear anything else. I sat in my recliner, the one with the tear in the fabric from years of use, and I stared at Marcus's pictures on the mantel. There was one of him at 6 years old, holding his trumpet, smiling with a gap-toothed grin that could light up the world. Another at his high school graduation, me standing proudly at his side, cap and gown hanging loose on his tall frame. I thought of the nights I stayed awake by his bedside when he was sick with the flu, the times I counted out pennies and dimes just to buy him new sneakers so he wouldn't be teased at school, the way I cheered when he made the honor roll. And now, after all of that, I wasn't even worthy of a seat at his wedding. Not even a witness. Not even an afterthought. It burned inside me, a kind of slow fire I never felt before. I had been disrespected in my life plenty of times, by patients who thought a black nurse was less than, by men who whistled at me like I was a dog, even by my own brothers when they told me a woman's place was in the kitchen. But this betrayal by my own flesh and blood, cut deeper than all of that. It was a wound to my soul. That night, I didn't sleep. I tossed and turned, every memory of Marcus rushing back to me like a flood. I remembered the day he was born, the way the nurse placed him in my arms, and he looked up at me with eyes too big for his tiny face. I promised him then I'd always protect him, always fight for him. And I did. When kids bullied him for being too quiet, I told him his silence was strength. When teachers said he might not make it to college, I stayed up late helping him with homework, reminding him he was smarter than anyone gave him credit for. And yet, here I was, not even invited to watch him take his vows. I thought about calling him, about asking him straight out why he would do this to me. But pride kept me still. A part of me didn't want to hear his answer, because deep down I already knew. Rachel. That girl had sunk her claws into him, twisted his love for me into something small and weak. She wanted him for herself, wanted to erase the years before she showed up, as if I hadn't carried him through the storm. The next morning I went to church. I sat in my usual pew, third row from the back, with my Bible open but my mind far away. When the choir sang, their voices lifted to heaven. I tried to join in, but my throat caught. I felt eyes on me. People could tell something was wrong, but I didn't want to explain. How could I? How do you tell folks that your only son left you out of his wedding? That you weren't considered special people? I kept my lips pressed tight and let the tears fall silently onto my lap. After service, Sister Loretta came over and hugged me. She smelled like lavender and pressed powder, and for a moment I let myself lean into her embrace. "You all right, Evelyn?" she asked softly. I forced a smile. "I'm fine, baby. Just tired." But I wasn't fine. I was breaking inside. When I got home, I made myself some coffee and sat at the kitchen table. The sun streamed in through the window, but it didn't warm me. I pulled out my old journal, the one with the leather cover Marcus had given me on Mother's Day years ago. I flipped through the pages, reading the entries I had written about him. His first day of kindergarten, his first school play, the time he scored the winning basket in a middle school game. My handwriting was shaky in places, smudged with tears in others, but the love poured through every word. And now, I thought bitterly, that same boy had stood in front of God and said, "I do," without me there to witness it. The anger rose in me then, stronger than the sadness.
How dare she?
How dare Rachel decide I wasn't good enough, wasn't special, enough to be part of my own son's wedding? Did she think her polished nails and sharp tongue made her better than me? She didn't know what it meant to sacrifice, to give everything you had for someone else's future. She didn't know what it meant to sit up all night with a fevered child, praying over every cough. She didn't know love the way I did. I thought about the first time Rachel came to my house. She'd looked around my little living room with that pinched smile of hers, her eyes lingering on the old couch, the faded curtains, the photos on the walls. She didn't say anything outright, but her silence spoke volumes. She thought she was too good for my world. And now she had the audacity to exclude me from a day that should have been mine as much as it was hers. I gripped my coffee cup, so hard my hand shook. My voice cracked the silence of the room as I whispered to myself, "She'll regret this." Not in a vengeful way, but in that quiet, knowing way a mother has when she sees something her child doesn't. Rachel thought she had won, thought she had pushed me aside, but life has a way of showing people's true colors. Later that afternoon, I picked up the phone and almost called Marcus again. My finger hovered over his name, the picture of him smiling and the little thumbnail staring back at me. But I couldn't do it. My pride, my hurt, my anger, they all mixed together, holding me back. If he wanted to explain, he knew where to find me. I wasn't going to chase after a boy I had already raised into a man. Still, the silence between us grew heavier with each passing day. No call, no visit, nothing. And that silence was worse than the words Rachel had spoken. It was one thing for her to wound me, but another for Marcus to let it happen. For him to stay quiet, to not even reach out to his mama. It was a betrayal I never thought I'd face. At night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the creaks of the house settling. I thought about Charles, my late husband, and wondered what he would say if he were here. He'd always been softer than me, more forgiving. Maybe he would tell me to let it go, to love Marcus no matter what. And I did love him, with every fiber of my being. But love doesn't erase pain. Love doesn't make you invisible. One evening, I sat on the porch as the sun went down, the cicadas buzzing in the trees. A young couple walked by, holding hands, laughing, the girl leaning into the boy's shoulder. I watched them and felt a twist of longing. Not for love. I'd had that once, and I cherished the memory, but for acknowledgement. For the simple respect of being seen, of being valued. Was that too much to ask from my own child? I whispered a prayer into the twilight, asking God for strength, for patience, for peace. But deep down, I also asked for truth. Because I knew this wasn't the end of it. Rachel might have thought she'd shut me out, but life had a way of circling back. And when it did, I wanted to be ready. So I sat there, rocking gently in my chair, the hurt heavy in my chest, but my spirit unbroken. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew this much. I wasn't going to let anyone erase me from my own son's story. Not Rachel. Not even Marcus. And as the stars blinked awake in the night sky, I felt something stir in me, a quiet resolve, born of years of hardship and survival. This wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. The days rolled into weeks, but the ache inside me didn't fade. I kept myself busy the best I could, cooking meals too big for one, watering the garden, visiting with the ladies at church, but everything reminded me of Marcus. Every young man I saw walking down the street, tall and lean with that careless stride, pulled my mind straight back to him. Every Sunday, when families filled the pews together, mothers sitting beside their grown children, I felt a hollowness inside me that I couldn't disguise. Folks at church tried to comfort me, but no amount of kind words could cover the fact that my only son had made the biggest move of his life without me. Still, I told myself, God don't miss a thing. Sooner or later, truth finds its way to the surface. That was my anchor, the only thing keeping me from drowning in bitterness. One Saturday evening, about a month after that fateful phone call, the telephone rang. The sound jolted me. These days it didn't ring much except for the occasional church announcement or Sister Loretta checking in. When I saw the name flash on the caller ID, my heart dropped and leapt all at once. Marcus. I picked it up quickly, trying to steady my voice. Hello. Mama, he said, and just that one word cracked something inside me. His voice was softer than I remembered, hesitant, like he wasn't sure how I'd receive him. Marcus, I said, my throat tight. It's been a while. There was a pause. Yeah, I know. I've been busy. Busy. That one word carried so much weight, and yet it explained nothing. Busy getting married without your mama? Busy living a life I wasn't allowed to see? But I swallowed those questions. I wasn't ready to scare him off just yet. How you doing, son? I asked instead. I'm all right, he said, but the way his voice dragged told me he wasn't. We talked for a few minutes, small talk about the weather, his job, my garden. But then, almost too quickly, his tone shifted. Mama, listen, Rachel might give you a call. Things are a little tight right now, and she was wondering if... Before he could finish, I felt the fire rise up in me. If what, Marcus? If I could pay your bills. He went quiet, and the silence on the other end of the line spoke louder than words. My hand trembled as I gripped the phone. Marcus, I said firmly, don't you dare let that girl use me like I'm some kind of bank. I worked myself to the bone raising you. I gave you everything I had so you could stand on your own 2 feet. Don't call me now asking me to pick up after her mistakes. He tried to protest, but I cut him off. I wasn't special enough to watch you say your vows, Marcus. But I'm good enough to pay your rent? Is that how it is? His breath caught, and for a second I thought he might hang up. Finally, he whispered, Mama, it wasn't like that. Rachel, she just thought it would be better to keep the wedding small. Small? I snapped. You think I care about small or big? I care about being there. About standing with my son. About watching you take that step. That's all I ever wanted. And she took that from me. He was silent again, and in that silence, I heard something I hadn't heard in years, shame. I softened my voice, though my chest still burned. Baby, I love you. You know that. But don't let that woman pull you so far away that you forget who you are, where you came from. Don't let her make you forget your mama. We didn't say much after that. He promised he'd visit soon, though his words sounded more like hope than certainty. When I hung up, my heart ached worse than before. It was like reaching for him and finding only air. The next week, just as he said, Rachel called. I almost didn't answer, but something in me wanted to hear her voice, to know what game she was playing. Miss Evelyn, she began, her tone dripping with forced sweetness. I was hoping we could talk about helping us out with some bills. Things are a little tight right now, and since you've always been so supportive of Marcus. I stopped her right there. Rachel, I said, my voice sharp as a blade. Supportive is not the same as being used. I'm not your safety net. I'm not your cushion. I am Marcus's mother, and I'll always love him, but I won't let you drag me into your mess. There was silence, then a little laugh, cold, mocking. I see where Marcus gets his stubbornness, she said lightly, but I could hear the edge underneath. You listen to me, I said, my hands shaking but my words steady. I may be old, but I'm not blind. I see what you're doing, and it won't last. Because truth has a way of showing up, and when it does, you'll regret how you treated me." She huffed and muttered something about me being dramatic before ending the call. I sat back, my heart pounding. For the first time, I felt something shift. The mask Rachel wore was slipping, and Marcus was caught in the middle. Weeks went by, and small signs began to show. Marcus stopped sounding cheerful when he called. He came by once alone, and I saw the tired lines etched in his face. He looked older than his years, worn down by something he wouldn't quite say. I cooked him a meal, fried chicken and collard greens, and he ate like he hadn't had a proper plate in weeks. "Mama," he said finally, setting down his fork, "sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice." My heart clenched. "You mean Rachel?" He nodded, not meeting my eyes.
"She's not easy."
She doesn't really understand family the way you do." I reached across the table, took his hand. "Baby, love should build you up, not tear you down. It should bring peace, not chaos. If you're already wondering, then you know deep down what's right." He looked at me then, his eyes full of conflict. "I don't want to disappoint you, Mama. You could never disappoint me by choosing happiness for yourself," I said softly. "But don't you disappoint yourself by settling for misery." He stayed a while that night, longer than he had in months, and when he left, he hugged me so tight it almost broke me. I watched him walk to his car, shoulders hunched, and I knew the cracks were spreading. Not long after, whispers reached me. A neighbor of theirs, someone who used to sing in my church choir, pulled me aside one Sunday. "Evelyn," she whispered, "I don't mean to meddle, but I seen Rachel out with another man last week. And not just once. Folks are starting to talk." My heart sank, but I can't say I was surprised. I thanked her quietly, my mind reeling. Poor Marcus, so wrapped up in her, blinded by whatever spell she had cast, and now this. I didn't tell him right away. I wanted to, but I knew he needed to see it for himself. Some lessons can't be taught with words. They have to be lived, even if it breaks your heart to watch. That night, I sat alone in my kitchen again, the clock ticking loud in the silence. I thought about everything I'd given Marcus, everything I'd endured, and how it had come to this. A son drifting away, a daughter-in-law with sharp claws, and me, caught in the middle of a storm I never asked for. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going to let Rachel destroy him completely. No matter how much it hurt, no matter how far he strayed, I was still his mama. And when the storm blew over, I would be the one standing, waiting, ready to welcome him back. Because that's what mothers do. The morning Rachel called, the air outside was heavy with summer heat, the kind that sticks to your skin and makes you tired before the day even begins. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring at the steam rising like it had secrets to tell. My garden needed watering, the laundry needed folding, but I couldn't move. I had been feeling a kind of weight in my chest for days, like something was coming. You know how a storm brews in the air before the clouds even gather? That's how it felt inside me. When the phone rang, I jumped. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick it up. Her voice came through the line, sharp and hurried, like she was late for something and already angry about it. "Miss Evelyn," Rachel said, without even a hello, "the rent is overdue. Did you transfer it?" For a moment, I thought I hadn't heard her right. I pulled the phone from my ear, looked at it like the words might change if I gave it a second chance, then pressed it back against my cheek. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice low, dangerous even to my own ears. "I said the rent is overdue," she repeated, this time slower, like she was talking to a child. "Marcus told me you'd help us out. So, did you transfer it?" My blood ran cold, then hot, like fire in my veins. This woman, this same woman who told me I wasn't special enough to stand at my son's wedding, who cut me out of the most important moment of his life, had the nerve, the gall, the audacity to call me asking for money. Not just asking, but demanding, like it was my duty, like she owned me. I closed my eyes, let the silence stretch until I could hear her sighing impatiently on the other end. My hands shook, but my voice came out steady. "Didn't I tell you?" I said softly. There was a pause. "Tell me what?" she asked, her tone mocking. Didn't I tell you from the start that love built on lies and greed won't stand? Didn't I warn Marcus about rushing into something with a woman who only knows how to take? And didn't I say that one day the truth would come knocking, loud enough for the whole world to hear? She went quiet. I could feel her arrogance falter through the line, if only for a second. You think you know everything, she snapped finally. But you don't know what it's like trying to make ends meet. We're struggling, and if you cared about Marcus, you'd help us. My laugh came out bitter, like it had been sitting at the bottom of my chest too long. Don't you dare throw Marcus in my face. I raised that boy by myself, worked nights and days until my body ached, and I never once asked anybody to pay my way. Don't talk to me about struggle, child. You wouldn't last a day in my shoes. Her voice rose, shrill now. This isn't about you. It's about us. You're selfish if you won't step in. What kind of mother refuses to help her son? That one cut deep, and she knew it. For a moment, the hurt stung so bad, I had to bite my lip to keep from crying. But then I remembered the years of sacrifice, the blisters on my hands, the empty stomachs I endured so Marcus could eat, the countless times I'd chosen him over myself. And the anger rose higher than the hurt. What kind of mother? I repeated, my voice trembling with fury. The kind who already gave everything she had. The kind who buried her husband too young and stood alone to raise a boy into a man. The kind who showed up for every game, every concert, every milestone, only to be told she wasn't special people when it mattered most. That's the kind of mother I am. And if you think I'll be your purse after all that, you're a fool. She gasped like I had slapped her through the phone. Now you listen to me, I continued, my voice firm as stone. You made your choice when you shut me out of that wedding. You thought you could build a life without me. Well, go ahead and live it. But don't you ever come crawling to me for money. My pockets aren't your rescue, and my love for my son isn't a debt you get to collect. Her breathing was fast, angry, but she had no words. For once, Rachel was speechless. I didn't give her the chance to recover. I hung up the phone and set it down on the table with a finality that shook the whole room. The silence afterward was deafening. My heart pounded so loud it drowned out the ticking clock. My hand shook, and I realized I was crying, not soft tears, but hot, heavy sobs that racked my chest. I hadn't cried like that in years. Not since Charles passed. Not since the nights when the bills piled up and I didn't know how I'd keep the lights on. I let myself cry until there was nothing left, until I sat slumped in that chair, staring at the cold coffee still sitting in front of me. Later that day, Marcus showed up at my door. He didn't call ahead, just knocked, and when I opened it, the look on his face nearly broke me. He looked ashamed, his shoulders slumped, his eyes red-rimmed like he hadn't slept. "Mama," he said quietly. "She told me what you said." I stepped aside to let him in, my heart torn between anger and love. He sat at the table, the same place I had been when Rachel called, and put his head in his hands. "I didn't know she was going to call you like that," he said. "I never wanted you to be dragged into this." "Then why, Marcus?" asked, my voice soft but firm. "Why let her? Why let her control everything? Even the way you treat your own mama?" He flinched, and I saw the boy he used to be, the one who wanted so badly to make me proud. I thought she was what I needed. She made me feel like I was enough. But now I don't know. "Son," I said, reaching across the table to take his hand, "love shouldn't feel like chains. It shouldn't take you away from the people who raised you, who love you no matter what. Love is supposed to lift you, not bury you under someone else's weight." Tears filled his eyes, and he squeezed my hand so tight it hurt. "I'm sorry, Mama. I didn't see it until now. I thought I was protecting her, but I think I've just been protecting myself from the truth." For the first time in months, I felt hope stir in me. The cracks were showing. Rachel's mask was slipping, and Marcus was finally starting to see her for who she was. We sat there for hours, talking, sometimes in words, sometimes in silence. I didn't press him, didn't tell him to leave her. I knew he had to come to that decision on his own. But I reminded him of who he was, of where he came from, of the strength that lived in his blood. When he left that night, he hugged me tighter than he ever had before, his face buried in my shoulder like he was a boy again. "I love you, Mama," he whispered. "I love you too, baby," I said, and this time my tears were soft, not bitter. After he drove away, I stood on the porch, watching the taillights disappear into the night. The cicadas sang in the trees, and a warm breeze rustled the leaves. For the first time in a long while, I felt peace settle over me. Not because the battle was over, but because I knew I wasn't fighting it alone anymore. Rachel thought she could break me. She thought she could erase me. But she didn't understand that mothers don't break easy. We bend, we ache, we cry, but we don't break. And as I turned back into the house, I whispered to myself, "Didn't I tell you?" Because I had. I had told her. And now, slowly but surely, the truth was beginning to show. The days after Marcus's visit felt like walking across a shaky bridge. You never knew if the next step would hold or crumble beneath you. He had come to me with tears in his eyes, confessing doubts I had prayed for him to finally see, but I knew words were one thing and action was another. Rachel was the kind of woman who clung tight, like a vine that wrapped itself around a tree until it strangled the very thing it fed on. She wasn't about to let go of Marcus easily, not when she saw him as her lifeline. I tried to busy myself with the little things, tending my garden, cooking meals that reminded me of home, sitting in my rocking chair with the evening breeze on my face. But behind it all, I was waiting for the phone to ring again, waiting for Marcus to show up at my door, waiting for the storm I knew was building. It didn't take long. One Saturday morning, the kind where the sky is so blue it almost hurts your eyes, Marcus came by again. He looked worse than before. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes shadowed with dark circles, and his hands wouldn't stay still. He twisted his car keys round and round like he didn't know what else to do with them. "Mama," he said, stepping into the house without waiting for me to invite him. He paced the living room like a caged animal before finally blurting it out. She went through my phone. I stayed quiet, just watching him, because I knew he had more to say. She found messages between me and an old friend. "Nothing bad, Mama, nothing like that. Just someone I grew up with, someone checking in on me." She accused me of cheating, screamed at me for hours, said if I really loved her, I wouldn't need anyone else. His voice cracked, and he sank onto the couch like his legs couldn't hold him anymore. "I can't breathe, Mama," he whispered. "It feels like no matter what I do, it's never enough. She keeps saying I owe her because she chose me, because she could have had better." And sometimes he swallowed hard, his eyes brimming with tears. Sometimes I start believing her. My chest ached hearing him say that. My boy, the same boy I raised to stand tall, to know his worth, was being broken piece by piece. "Marcus," I said, sitting beside him, laying my hand over his, "listen to me. A woman who loves you doesn't keep a scoreboard of what she gave up. She doesn't make you feel small, so she can feel big. That's not love. That's control." He nodded, but I could see the war in his eyes. Love, even toxic love, has a way of chaining you tighter than hate ever could. "Do you remember when you were 10, I said softly, "and the boys at school teased you about your shoes? You came home crying, saying you weren't good enough because you didn't have what they had. What did I tell you then?" His lip trembled. "You told me it's not about the shoes on your feet, it's about the steps you take in them." "That's right," I said, squeezing his hand. "And right now, you're letting Rachel tell you your steps aren't good enough. But you are enough, Marcus. You always have been." He broke down then, leaning into me like he hadn't done since he was a boy. I held him, my strong son who suddenly felt so fragile in my arms. But even as I comforted him, I knew Rachel wouldn't back down. Not her. Women like that didn't know how to lose gracefully. They only knew how to fight dirtier when the ground started slipping under them. And I was right. That evening, just as the sun was setting and the cicadas began their endless song, my phone buzzed again. Her name lit up the screen. I almost didn't answer, but some part of me wanted to face her head on. "Miss Evelyn," she said, her voice honeyed but sharp underneath, "I hear you've been filling Marcus's head with poison." I let out a slow breath. Poison? Or truth? You think you know what's best for him, she snapped, dropping the sweetness. But you don't live his life. You don't know what he needs. I know he doesn't need to be torn down every day, I shot back. I know he doesn't need to beg for the right to breathe. I know he deserves love that lifts him, not love that cages him. She laughed then, a cold sound that made my skin crawl. You're just jealous. That's what this is. You can't stand that he chose me over you. My hand tightened around the phone. Chosen? Is that what you call it when you cut his mama out of the most important day of his life? When you shame him into thinking he's lucky you tolerate him? Baby, that's not being chosen. That's being trapped. Her silence told me I'd hit the mark, but she recovered quickly. You're not going to win this. He's my husband, not yours. And if you really loved him, you'd stay out of our marriage. I didn't answer right away. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Finally, I said, if you think love means silence in the face of abuse, then you don't know what love is. She hung up on me. I sat there for a long while, the phone still in my hand, staring into the darkness creeping in through the window. My body trembled, but not from fear, from resolve. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting for my relationship with Marcus anymore. I was fighting for his spirit, his very sense of self. The next few weeks were a storm. Rachel tried everything: sweetness, anger, guilt. She called me names I wouldn't repeat even in prayer. She told Marcus I hated him, that I wanted to ruin his life. And Marcus, God help him, was caught in the middle, torn in two. But little by little, I saw the cracks widen. He called me more often, stopped making excuses for her. Sometimes he'd come over and just sit in silence, like my house was the only place he could breathe. And I didn't push.
I just let him have that space.
One night, he came late, long after the streetlights flickered on. His eyes were swollen, his knuckles red like he'd punched a wall. She threw a plate at me, he said, his voice hollow. Said if I ever talked to you again, she'd leave me. But Mama, for the first time, I wanted her to. The words hung between us, heavy and raw. I wanted to shout hallelujah, but I kept my voice steady. Then maybe that's your answer, son. Maybe it's time to let go. He sat down hard, buried his face in his hands, and whispered, I don't know if I'm strong enough. I reached out, lifted his chin until his eyes met mine. You are, I told him, because you're my son, and I didn't raise you to live in chains. The truth is, I didn't know what he'd decide. Love is a stubborn thing, even when it hurts. But I knew this much. Rachel's grip was loosening, and the boy I raised was starting to remember who he was. That night, after he left, I sat by my window and whispered a prayer. Not just for Marcus, but even for Rachel. Because a woman who lives by control and fear is a woman who's lost herself. And though I couldn't save her, I could pray she found her own truth. But more than anything, I prayed that my son would finally choose freedom. The call came just after midnight. I was half asleep, the kind of sleep where your body has given in but your spirit is still restless. When the phone rang, my first thought was that something terrible had happened. Calls that late rarely bring good news. It was Marcus. His voice was low, shaking, like he was whispering in the dark. Mama, he said, I can't stay here anymore. I sat up straight, my heart thudding. What happened? There was silence on the line, then a ragged sigh. She locked me out, said if I wanted to come back in, I had to swear I'd cut you off for good. She stood at the door, yelling in front of the neighbors, calling me worthless. I'm sitting in my car right now, Mama. I don't even know where to go. The sound of his voice, it wasn't just tired, it was broken. My boy, the one I had carried on my hip and sent out into the world, was sitting in the dark with nowhere to turn. You know where to go, I whispered. Come home, Marcus. He was quiet for a moment, then I heard him sob, not loud, but the kind of quiet sob that squeezes out of you when you've been holding it in too long. I'm on my way. I left the porch light on for him, just like I used to when he was a teenager staying out past curfew. Some things never change. You always want your child to see the light guiding them back. When he arrived, he didn't look like himself. His shirt was wrinkled, his face pale, his eyes red. He carried no bag, no belongings, nothing but his car keys and a weariness that clung to him like smoke. He stepped inside, and before I could even speak, he collapsed against me, his arms around my shoulders, his tears soaking into my nightgown. "I can't do it anymore, Mama," he said. "I thought I could fix it. I thought if I just loved her enough, she'd change. But the more I gave, the more she took. And now there's nothing left." I held him, rocking him slightly, the way I used to when he was small. "You don't have to fix her, baby," I said softly. "You can't fix someone who doesn't see they're broken. But you can save yourself." He stayed the night, sleeping in his old room, the one I'd never had the heart to change. The posters on the wall were faded, the trophies dusty, but it was still his space. I watched him as he slept, his chest rising and falling, his face finally at peace. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed up praying for him, wondering if I'd ever see him come back to himself. And there he was, under my roof again, fragile but free. But peace never lasts long when you're dealing with someone like Rachel. The next morning, my phone started buzzing before the sun had even fully risen. I didn't answer, but the messages poured in. First the anger. "You stole my husband. You ruined my marriage." Then the guilt. "He was happy until you got in his head." Then the desperation. "Tell him to come back. Please. We can work this out." By mid-afternoon, she was calling from different numbers. I turned the ringer off, but I knew she wasn't going to stop. Marcus stayed quiet most of the day, walking through the house like a man who didn't know where he fit anymore. I let him have his silence. Sometimes words only make wounds deeper when they need time to breathe. But that evening, as we sat at the kitchen table eating dinner, he finally spoke. "She said if I don't come back, she'll destroy me," he said flatly. "She said she'll take everything, my money, my reputation, even make sure no one else ever wants me." I set my fork down, meeting his eyes. "Marcus, listen to me. That's not love talking. That's fear. She's afraid of losing control. And the only power she has is the power you give her." He shook his head. "It's not that easy, Mama. You don't just walk away from vows. I promised her forever." "Forever," I said gently, "isn't supposed to feel like prison. Marriage is sacred, yes, but it's not supposed to destroy you. God didn't put you here to be somebody's punching bag, Marcus. He put you here to live, to grow, to love freely. You think he looks down and smiles when he sees you suffering like this?" Marcus stared at his plate, his jaw tight. Finally, he whispered, "I'm scared." "I know," I said. "But courage doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you move forward anyway." That night, the house shook with banging at the front door. Rachel had come. Her voice carried through the wood, shrill and desperate. "Marcus, come out here right now. Do you think you can hide behind your mama? You're mine, do you hear me? Mine." I stood at the door, but didn't open it. Marcus came down the hallway, his face pale, his hands trembling. "She's not going to stop," he said, his voice hollow. I touched his arm. "Then you need to be the one to stop her." He stared at the door, listening to her scream, her fists pounding like thunder. And then something shifted in his face. His shoulders straightened.
His jaw set.
He walked to the door, opened it just a crack, and said in a voice I hadn't heard from him in years, steady and firm, "Go home, Rachel." She froze. For a moment, she didn't seem to recognize him. Then her anger returned, hotter than ever. "How dare you talk to me like that? After everything I've done for you?" "You mean everything you've taken from me," he said. "I'm done, Rachel. This isn't love. And I won't let you do this to me anymore." He shut the door before she could answer, locked it, and leaned against it, his chest heaving. She screamed outside for a while longer, then eventually the sound of her car tires screeched down the street. When he turned back to me, I saw it, the first spark of freedom in his eyes. He was still scared, still shaken, but something had broken loose. "She's going to make my life hell," he whispered. "Maybe," I said, "but hell doesn't last forever. And neither will she, not if you stand firm." We spent that night talking about what came next, lawyers, paperwork, the long road of disentangling a life from someone who never should have had that much hold in the first place. It wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time, Marcus wasn't talking about going back. He was talking about moving forward. Later, when he'd gone to bed, I sat in my rocking chair, staring out the window at the night sky. The stars blinked faintly above, and I thought of Charles. "You'd be proud of him," I whispered. "He's finding his way back." And as the crickets sang and the night held me in its quiet arms, I felt something inside me ease. The battle wasn't over, but my son had finally taken the first step toward freedom. And that was enough to keep me standing. Because sometimes love isn't about holding on. Sometimes the greatest love you can give is the courage to let go. I had always believed storms passed in their own time, but the storm that was Rachel seemed determined to drag us under before it cleared. After that night Marcus shut the door on her, she didn't vanish quietly into the shadows. No, she came back harder. Texts, calls, messages sent through mutual friends. She painted herself the victim, told anyone who would listen that Marcus had been brainwashed by his meddling mother.
Me.
She spat my name like a curse. At first, I worried Marcus would crumble under the weight of it. He was tender-hearted, always had been. Even as a boy, he couldn't stand the thought of disappointing someone. That was part of what made him so vulnerable to Rachel in the first place. But something inside him had shifted that night at the door, and though I saw him struggle, I also saw him stand taller with each passing day. Still, the hardest fight was yet to come. One afternoon, about 2 weeks later, I came home from church to find Marcus pacing my living room, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He looked up as I walked in, his eyes full of turmoil. "She served me papers," he said. I set my purse down slowly, bracing myself. "Divorce?" He shook his head. "Restraint order. Says I threatened her. Says she's scared for her life." His voice cracked on the last word. "Mama, I never laid a hand on her." I stepped forward, cupping his face in my hands. "I know, baby. I know you didn't. But this is what people like her do. When they lose control, they lie. They twist things to keep you tangled in their web." His eyes filled with tears, and he pulled back, pacing again. "What if people believe her? What if I lose everything? My job, my reputation?" "They won't," I said firmly, "because the truth has a way of shining through, even if it takes time. But Marcus, you have to fight smart. No more letting her pull you into her chaos. You walk the high road, no matter how hard it is." He nodded, though I could see the fear clinging to him. That week was one of the longest of my life. Meetings with lawyers, whispered conversations in hallways. Marcus hunched over paperwork at my kitchen table, his face lined with worry. Rachel wasn't just trying to break him. She wanted to scorch the earth beneath him so he'd have nothing left to stand on. And yet, through it all, he kept coming home to me. Each evening, when the day had chewed him up, he'd sit at my table and let the quiet of my house piece him back together. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we didn't. But every night, I made sure he left with food in his belly and love in his heart. Then came the day of the hearing. I sat in the courtroom pew, my hands clenched together so tight they ached. Rachel sat across the room, dressed in somber colors, her face painted with false sorrow. She wept as she told the judge how frightened she was, how Marcus had raged at her, how she feared for her safety. Every word was a lie, but she delivered it like a sermon, dramatic pauses and trembling hands included. I glanced at Marcus. His jaw was tight, but his eyes stayed clear. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't lash out. He didn't match her theatrics. He stood, his shoulders squared, and said in a calm, steady voice, "Your Honor, I never harmed my wife. The truth is, she controlled every part of my life until I couldn't breathe anymore. When I finally said no, she decided to destroy me. But I am not the man she describes. I am not a danger to her or anyone. I just want my freedom." The judge listened, eyes shifting between the two of them. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst right there in the pew. When the gavel finally came down, denying Rachel's request and setting a date for divorce proceedings, I felt air rush back into my lungs. For the first time, Marcus had been heard. Rachel stormed out of the courtroom, her heels clacking like gunshots on the tile. She didn't look at us, but I could feel her rage like a hot wind as she passed. That night, Marcus sat with me on the porch, staring out at the dark street. "It's really over, Mama," he whispered. "I can't believe it. It's the beginning," I said softly. "The end of her hold, yes, but the start of your freedom. And freedom, well, that takes some getting used to." The weeks that followed were hard. Rachel didn't stop her games right away. She spread rumors, sent venom through mutual friends, even showed up at Marcus's workplace once, screaming in the parking lot until security escorted her away. But each time, Marcus didn't falter. He didn't run back. He didn't bend. He stood firm, and every day he did, I saw more of my boy return. One evening, months later, he came home with something in his hands. A box. He set it on the kitchen table and opened it. Inside were photos, cards, little mementos from his years with Rachel. Without a word, he took them out one by one, ripped them to pieces, and dropped them into the trash. When he finished, he sat back, let out a long breath, and for the first time in a long while, he smiled. "I'm free," he said simply. Tears filled my eyes as I reached across the table, taking his hand. "Yes, baby, you are." That night, as I lay in bed, I thought back over it all. The wedding I wasn't invited to, the cruel words, the phone calls demanding money, the storm that had nearly swallowed us whole. And I thought about the moment Rachel had called me, bold as brass, asking for rent money, like I was nothing more than her wallet. That was the moment I had drawn my line in the sand, the moment I'd said, "Didn't I tell you?" And now, here we were. The dust settling, my son finding his way back, me still standing strong. Rachel had tried to erase me, but mothers don't disappear. We endure.
We outlast.
One Sunday morning not long after, Marcus stood beside me in church for the first time in years. The choir lifted their voices, the congregation swayed, and I felt his hand slip into mine. I looked at him, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't the broken boy who had come to me that midnight months ago. It was a man. My son. Strong, scarred, but free. After the service, as we walked out into the sunlight, he said, "Mama, I don't know how I'll ever repay you." I stopped, turned to face him, and smiled. "You already have. You came home." He pulled me into his arms, hugging me so tight it almost hurt. But I didn't mind. I'd rather hurt from love than from loss. And as I held him there, in the bright light of a new day, I whispered the words that had carried me through it all. "Didn't I tell you?" Because I had told her. And in the end, I had been right. Love built on lies and greed cannot stand. But love, the kind that comes from a mother's heart, unshakable and unbreakable, that love endures. My dear friends, that was my story. A story of love, of pain, of betrayal, but most of all, of survival. I told you from the start, didn't I tell you? And in the end, the truth stood tall, just as it always does. If this story touched your heart, don't just click away. Show your love, hit that like button, and if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe. There are more stories to come, stories that will stir your soul and keep you thinking long after the video ends. And I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, where are you watching from? And have you ever faced someone like Rachel in your own life? How did you overcome it? Your story might be the very thing someone else needs to hear today. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that storms do pass, and that no matter how dark it gets, love will always light the way. Thank you for staying with me through every twist and turn. Until next time, remember these words. Didn't I tell you?